Hi, welcome to what is it, May book wrap up? I hope it is May book wrap up. I read a lot of books, both April and May, that I won't be able to fit into this video. I am keeping all books that had LGBTQ characters in them for next month. This month I did a reading challenge, so Matilda from last month will explain it in a second. Just ignore the numbers that I'm saying. I'm going to talk about 8 books, 4 of them for Asian readathon, and which I will explain in a second, and 4 of them are like holdovers from the last month. So welcome, dzień dobry wszystkim z TikToka, and let's get into it. Sorry about Kira. Next month wrap-up will be, I think, really interesting because I will be participating in Asian readathon, so just reading books by Asian authors, and I mean all of them will be by Asian authors, but also about Asian characters and stuff. The event is kind of hosted by With Cindy, so I'll link her video where she explains the rules of how she proposes you do this readathon, but if you just want to read a book by an Asian author, that's fine as well. Oh shit. I want to read at least 3, possibly 5, and we'll be using this template to choose genres for my books. And I'm already reading the first one, which is Convenience Store Woman. I don't remember the author, but I'll put the cover on screen. The first book that I read this month was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, which is a literary fiction novel, which is very short, so will be this review. This was a 4-star read. The main character of the book, I do not remember her name, is a woman who identifies as a convenience store worker first, person second, and women third. Though I guess the order is up to debate, though she is a convenience store worker first and foremost, which is very original, wouldn't you say? And she's clearly neurodivergent, does not experience emotions the way that most people do, and she finds her way around the world by mimicking other people, their mannerisms, their speech patterns to fit in better. And this is a story of how she kind of rediscovers her identity. As I said, a 4-star read, 100% recommend. It was great. The second book that I read this month was Aisha at Last by Uzma Jalaluddin, and I'd say this book is a 3 out of 5 stars, but I would round it up to 4. It's more 4 than 3, if you get what I mean. Anyway, it is a retelling of Jane Austen's novel Pride and Prejudice. It's a second Asian retelling of her story that I read this month. I mean, the first. I read another retelling of Jane Austen this month as well. It's upcoming next. Anyway, as I mentioned, 3.5 stars, and I really appreciated this book. It tells a story of Aisha, who's a first-generation immigrant. She immigrated as a child to Canada, Toronto, and she's an Indian Muslim. So the romance is halal. That means it's acceptable within the constraints of Islam. Our main character is a hijabi, and I thought that it was a very interesting take on Jane Austen because the weight of social relationships, familial connections, as well as just your opinion in the public eye is something that is not really as current within Western cultures right now as it is within Asian cultures. And I think that is something that I really appreciate. But let me just say the plus sides, the biggest advantages, the biggest strong points of this book. First of all, the writing. Second of all, the setting. Third of all, the plot. Aisha slowly falls in love with the equivalent of Mr. Darcy, who is named Khaled. But now I hope that I said it right. But now let's talk disadvantages. So first of all, Khaled, who's the equivalent of Mr. Darcy. Let's examine Mr. Darcy super quickly. He's the archetype, the best male romantic lead ever written, and that's for a reason. Not only he's superficially tall and handsome and rich, but also he is a very good person. He shows that he is kind via his actions. He's not very nice when you talk to him, but he's very kind, and it's demonstrated by his actions towards his sister, towards his servants, and people within his power. And also he is Elizabeth's superior. I'm going to include the quote by Mr. Bennet, Elizabeth's dad. In the time of Jane Austen's novel, if a man of an equal standing as the woman was not better educated than her, it means that he didn't take advantage of all the opportunities awarded to him because of his station in life and gender. So Mr. Darcy is more worldly, has more worldly experience. He doesn't have the emotional intelligence of Elizabeth and the understanding of etiquette, kind of, and social norms, but that just makes him more lovable. And he's also very proud, but that changes throughout the novel. Now, going back to Khaled, he has none of these positive traits. I mean, he doesn't have to be rich, tall, or handsome. He's tall-ish, I guess, but he's not handsome and he's not rich. He's also not Aisha's superior, because while they both finished university, he does not really educate himself further. He does not really watch movies, he doesn't watch books. He cooks sometimes, he plays basketball at the mosque, and he follows the Quran very diligently. He's very, very fundamentalist in his beliefs, but that would be it. Technically, he sends money to his sister, which is an act of kindness, but in his daily life, his religion is so limiting to him that he cannot really perform kindness, to be honest, in a way other than, I guess, engaging with the mosque, within the mosque community, which he barely does. I mean, he prays, but that's kind of it. So Khaled is a very unsatisfactory romantic prospect. I liked him as a character, and I respect Aisha's choice to like him, but the romance did not appeal to me. They absolutely failed to make him appealing. At some point, Aisha mentions that he's handsome, but she didn't think so for the first 3/4 of the book, so why would I believe her? She is just the force of proximity. Also, at first I thought that maybe within halal romances, descriptions of looks would be prohibited. I mean, I was not aware of the norms, so I figured that was possible, but it's not so, because the equivalent of Mr. Wickham, by the way, the Aisha version of Mr. Wickham is amazing, and I absolutely adore his characterization, is absolutely handsome. So it's just Khaled who's not very attractive. Yeah, so I guess that would be it for the book. As I mentioned, 3.5. I will round it up to 4 on Goodreads. The third book that I finished this month was Recipe for Persuasion by Sonali Dev, and as I mentioned, it's another Jane Austen retelling of Persuasion, which, along Pride and Prejudice, is my favorite Jane Austen novel and one of my favorite books of all time. I absolutely love it. And this retelling is something that I enjoyed as well, and this is a truly 4-star read. I still have one minor gripe, but let me just explain the story to you. So our main character is an Indian immigrant. She lived with her father most of her life. He was emotionally abusive to her. He had a restaurant which she inherited, and she's estranged from her mother. And the biggest difference from Persuasion is that we not only see her perspective, we also see the perspective of her mother. So I'd say this is an interpretation of Persuasion, because the figure of mother, well, in Persuasion, it's the mother who's passed away and the father who's present. And here the mother is alive, the father has since passed away, and the mother is actually a valuable character. She's very complicated, and the mother, and suffered a lot of trauma, and we kind of get acquainted with her story throughout the novel. And our main character is roped into participating in kind of like Dancing with the Stars, but Cooking with the Stars, on a TV show, in order to procure some money to save her father's restaurant. The star that she is cooking alongside is Diego something. He's a Brazilian football star who played for a British football team, like football as in soccer, like nasza piłka nożna. And anyway, they have known each other as teenagers, they have been in love, but they have split up over some kind of misunderstanding, I'd say. And that's it. I won't mention much more because that would be spoilers. I will mention that my one minor gripe is that once certain people learn of the trauma that our main character's mother has suffered, they forgive her instantly all the mistakes that she's made. It is acknowledged that her decisions were essentially selfish, but they are used as an explanation. They are also excused in the sense that it was an acceptable choice to make, and it is, but it had terrible consequences for her daughter. So I'd say that, I guess it is in line with the collectivist mindset of Indian culture, so it makes sense that it was so. However, I do feel that some more conversations would have been valuable. But yeah, that is like a clean 4 stars. The last book that I read this month was The Iron Widow by Siran J. Zhao. The setting is really complicated. It is a sci-fi novel, so just brace yourselves while I explain. Our main character, Wu Zetian, I'm sorry I am butchering the name, is a woman living in a civilization which is a mix of imperial Chinese aesthetic, including the Chinese food binding, which our main character is a victim of. She's disabled because of that procedure, and sci-fi technology. And in the world there is a conflict between Huinduins, who are those huge monsters, and humans. Humans fight Huinduins in those giant mecha robots, which are piloted by a team of 2 people, a man and a woman, in a yin-yang balance, with the man being the dominant one and the actual pilot, and the woman, called concubine, being there just as a fuel for energy. So the vast majority of these women die because they are used up as a source of fuel. Sometimes there is something that is called a perfect match, a balanced match, where a male pilot and a female pilot are well balanced in chi, and then the woman does not die. They as a team then pilot the mecha for a long time. They are kind of fake pilot married then, though I guess these marriages are real enough for them. Our main character is frustrated with her lot in life, being a woman. Her big sister, her older sister, was died when she was a concubine, but because she did not die on the battlefield, she was killed by her pilot before even reaching the battlefield. Our main character, Wu Zetian, is very frustrated and wants to avenge her, so she also enlists in the army. And there, it turns out that she has a lot of power. She has 2 partners. One of them is kind of not like a royal, but an important rich boy. And the other one is Li, her co-pilot. And that's it when it comes to just the summary of the story. The book is rather bloody. There is quite a lot of death, and it is very angry. There's a lot of like a justified female rage within the story, so it is a very satisfied read, but it is not, I believe, too morally complex. It's not like, I don't know, Gone Girl or Sharp Objects, where the rage or the frustration or female suffering is kind of more explored. This is kind of like a power fantasy if you're very angry about the way, for example, that our situation is worsening when it comes to the abortion debacle or something. So it was a very satisfying read, but it's not a terribly high level literature. But I will read the second part when it comes out. So it's a 3-star read for me. Yeah, I'd say that's fair. The first book that I read this month was Cinder and Ella by Kelly Oram. It was a young adult book, I believe, or maybe a book for teenagers, to be honest, and a romance and a retelling of Cinderella. And I read this book before. I've read it when I used to work at a bookstore, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I was already an adult by then when I read it for the first time, but still I had to check whether it holds up, because Ella, our Cinderella, is actually disabled in a car accident that takes her mother's life, and then has to go live with her estranged father, his new wife, and his stepdaughters. So the dad is present throughout all of the book. The Cinder in the story is her internet friend, who also turns out to be a famous not teenage, a famous young adult heartthrob. So I don't know if this constitutes a trigger warning, because he's like 21 and she's 18, so there is that kind of age difference, but she's not too mature, to be honest. So I don't know, in their case I'd say it works. Anyhow, I love this book completely. It's a 5-star read for me. That's why I wanted to start with it on a strong note. The reason why I loved it so much was the complexity of the dynamics between the characters and the psychological side of things, because this book, I feel, really does its due diligence when it comes to the trauma that Ella has experienced and how she deals with it. With the pressure that is put on Cinder, because he is an actor and has a lot of responsibility riding on his shoulders, but also it shows us the bad traits of these characters. They are complex, they have faults, that's what I wanted to say. They have faults, but the relationships that really sold this book for me were the relationships between all the adults and the children, I mean all the sisters and stepsisters, as well as the new set of parents. I felt that they were really complex as characters. As I mentioned, they had faults as well. The downsides, I mean, it is written in a language that is very plausible for me to have been written by a teenager. It was written by a woman in her 20s, but since it's a first-person narration, it feels like you're in the mind of a teenager. Some people might not love that, I guess. So language, definitely not a strong point of this book. Neither are parallels, or any sort of stylistic choices, but still I loved it for what it was, and it was a 5-star read for me. The second book was Seatmate by Cara Bastone, who is a romantic comedy writer. The book was an audiobook, and it was relatively short, like 5 or 6 hours. And that's what Seatmate was, a romantic comedy telling a story of a photographer and a dude who sit together in a bus and start a friendship, which then turns into a different kind of relationship, or does it? Anyhow, Call Me Maybe by Cara Bastone was in my top reads for the last year, or top listens, because it was so good. Seatmate, however, is honestly nothing special, nothing to write home about. I think it's perfectly competent, so it cannot get less than 3 stars. However, it has nothing special, and also there were 2 things that I did not like, but they were very subjective. First of all, the characters were quirky in a way that I did not bought. They had just some quirky, not like other boys, not like other girls' behaviors, which I don't know, I just didn't buy them. And as a second thing, there's a character, so micro spoilers, not a huge one, but there was a character of a mother of the main male character, who was characterized as a future monster-in-law in general. So Cara took the time to establish this woman, this mother, as a terrible nag, and the main male character as a mama's boy, and then does not take the same care and amount of time to prove to us that they are not what they first were presented as. I do not buy the complexity and the misunderstandings in their character dynamics, because they just were not properly set up. The third book that I read this month was Stranger on the Shore by Josh Lanyon. It was a reread. I'm going through my Josh Lanyon book library. I used to be a fan of hers, but not anymore. But so how do I feel about it now? I used to like this book, but felt like the very ending, not even the epilogue, but just the last couple of pages, the final conversations weren't very satisfactory, and I still feel like that. However, I used to think that it was a pretty decent mystery, and I mean, this book is kind of what people who don't like mystery novels think they are like. In general, this is a story about Griffin, a reporter who wants to write a book about the kidnapping of Brian Arlington, and goes to stay with the remaining members of Arlington family, and there meets the lawyer of that family. And there is the main mystery is what actually happened to Brian. So it happened like, I don't know, 20 years ago or whatever, as for the events in the book. And our author, Griffin, tries to uncover the mystery. And it's pretty decent, though. It's pretty decent, to be honest, but I've come to realize that Josh Lanyon likes to include kind of several different mysteries. Like there is extortion, kind of, which can be related or not. There is somebody murdering people, and I don't think she's the best at frankly intertwining those stories. And what I think about this book, I think that it is boring, but in a way that I like. I used it to fall asleep to for like a week or something, and I had a fun time with it. So the final rating, I like it for what it is, which is a fall asleep novel for me. It's more like a 2-star read. And the last 4th book that I read this month was Murder Takes the High Road by Josh Lanyon, which is part of my Josh Lanyon reread, re-listen. And this book was terribly mediocre as well. I think it's objectively boring, but the thing is that the book tells a story about a guy who's obsessed with a huge fan of this crime novelist. So he buys a ticket to a trip which takes you to Scotland and through different places which were important in her books, and then you get to meet her by the end. The trouble is that it was a 2-ticket type of deal with his boyfriend, who's now an ex, and came to this trip with his own new, fresh boyfriend. There are 2 other youngish dudes on this trip for a reason. It's a gay romance, by the way. 2 other youngish dudes, so there are 4 men. 1 guy with his mother, 1 like insurance agent, the ex-boyfriend, and ex-boyfriend, new boyfriend. So there are 4 potential romantic options technically. But the plot is that there are some sort of mysterious happenings going on throughout the trip, and you're meant to be engaged. Honestly, in the book it's set up in the way that the characters do not care an appropriate amount about these events, and if they don't, and it is explicitly said that they don't, how are you meant to? But why do I love it? I love it because it is about a trip which is fun for mostly elderly. All other people on the trip are upper middle age and elderly, and that's my jam. I love old people. I love like sanatoriums, or I don't know, like health retreats and stuff like that for older people. I love reading about older people. I love crime stories involving older people. Like Miss Marple is my girl. I love her. So even though it was actually kind of boring, I guess, I loved it, and it was just fine to fall asleep to, and it's a 4-star read for me. I don't recommend it, but I love it, even though it's bad. So yeah. And with that, we've come to a conclusion of this monthly book wrap-up. If you enjoy hanging out with me, consider checking out my TikTok as well as Reddit. I don't know what you're up to more. If you just like my face, then I have an Instagram as well. All of these things will be listed in the description box below, and see you sometime soon. Bye bye.